Welcome to my channel and thank you for choosing to watch this video. Dear viewer, at the beginning, let's briefly recall what we talked about in the previous episode. In the previous episode, we discussed the period right after birth. And we said that the mother's womb is the 0 point of our first life project. However, the moment of leaving the mother's womb is the moment of choosing one of the infinite number of potential life paths that we could take and build for ourselves. And although we said it doesn't depend on us what this period of learning and adaptation to our new reality will look like, however, over time, once we have assimilated all the most important information necessary for everyday functioning, we'll automatically start the next stage of our life project, which is the stage of now expanding the foundations that we have built so far. But in order to expand them, we will need imagination and, of course, other people. And that's what we are going to focus on in today's video. So the plan for today's recording is as follows. In the first part, we will start by reminding ourselves what's imagination and why we should continuously work on its development. In the second part, however, we will discuss the issue of building relationships with other people. And here, among other things, we will discuss the types of such relationships, their meaning and impact on our lives, but also development opportunities that may result from our shared experiences. Whereas in the third part, we will summarize our today's topic and of course draw some valuable conclusions so that you can implement them in your life. So, let's move on to the first part of this recording. Imagination, it's a product of our mind, and it's by far one of the most important innate human abilities. Because thanks to our imagination, we're able to create our reality. And by reality, I mean everything we experience with our senses. And even more clearly, say from a logical point of view, imagination is the ability to recall images, sensations, experiences, or associations related to a given context. What's more, thanks to our imagination, we know how to react in different situations. Or we can also create an image of something that we would like to give a physical form. So, in other words, to make it real. So we can actually say that without imagination, we wouldn't be able to function in everyday life. And generally speaking, to experience everything we experience. Okay, so in that case, we'll need to go back to childhood and explain how the child learns to wield this extraordinary skill from the very first days of his life. Because imagination, like any other skill, also must be developed. And here, as you can certainly imagine, honing this skill takes place in actually several stages. However, the duration of each of them is rather very individual, since it depends on the pace of child's development. And such a first stage is to familiarize your child with various types of everyday objects. And here, of course, remembering about maintaining safety. And thanks to this, the child will be able to check their, for example, consistency, shape, size, taste, or even smell. However, as he develops, the next stage will be, for example, drawing to your child, reading to them, telling them different stories, or describing the world around them. Because in this way, of course, we will stimulate their imagination. And this means that the child, using the previously collected and encoded information, will now be able to imagine the objects, people, places, or even some specific events described to them. Whereas at a little later stage, when, let's say, the child will have a much more developed vocabulary, a great way to develop its imagination is to introduce them with various types of educational games. And here, for example, the association game will be a great one. Also, creating stories together, preferably with some intrusive moral. Also, painting together, solving puzzles, and so on and so forth. But we should also remember that in addition to what we pass on to the child will also observe and learn both us and our behavior, as well as the world around them. And if he will observe, he will also imitate. Except that for a small child, everything he observes at the beginning is meaningless. And so on until we explain to them the purpose and the meaning of some particular behavior or event. And here I would like to emphasize that a conscious upbringing consists in providing the child only with true information and only those that are conducive to his development. Also, let's remember that it's mainly from our behavior that the child learns these good or bad habits. Okay, so now that we know how we can help the child develop his imagination, we can finally proceed to the next stage, the stage of expanding our life project. Because knowing the basics of how to live and function in this world, now we can also try and test our previously acquired knowledge in practice. So, in other words, to translate theory into practice. But in order for us to see what independent living looks like in practice, we will need not only imagination, but also other people. Because it's thanks to them and our diversity that we have the opportunity to learn about, for example, different views and traditions, or personality types and human behaviors. Through another person, we also have the opportunity to create and experience some new versions of ourselves. And this is mainly because of our innate need to feel a sense of belonging. So, taking into account our different growing up conditions, upbringing, or ethnic background, unaware of anything, the child will try to adapt to its new environment. And this means that it will also begin to imitate other people's patterns and behaviors. And you will actually find out about it much more in just a moment, because in the second part of this video. So, to briefly summarize what I just said, imagination at the beginning of our life is mainly used to help us learn and adapt to our new reality. And through imagination, we can create or recall an image of something that's related to a given context. And thanks to this, for example, we know how to react in a given situation. The very first relationship we establish in life is certainly the relationship with parents and siblings, of course, if we have any. And although on the surface it seems that this relationship should be the one closest to our heart,
It turns out that not in every family this bond is as strong as we would like it to be.
And here comes the question. What if I told you that our view of our own situation may still be just an opinion limited to some certain stereotypical beliefs? Let's consider, is there really one correct model of an ideal family? Absolutely no. The fact that we were born into the family we were born into is not a punishment, but an opportunity to grow. And it's actually your job to understand what your relationship with your family has brought to you or to your life, whatever it looked like. Because whatever childhood memories you have retained, know that their purpose was, or still is, to teach you something about yourself and life in general.
Therefore, be sure that there is no such thing as one correct model of an ideal family.
And this means that we shouldn't compare ourselves with other families and their experiences. Let's also remember that everyone expresses their love and care in a completely different way, depending on how they were raised. So, if we will compare our own life situation with that of others, we may never see the valuable lessons we could learn from our own experiences.
However, it's true that there are also families where there is complete lack of love, and instead there is, for example, violence and/or abuse of psychoactive substances. And this type of family is the so-called pathological family, which means a family deviating from the norm.
And here comes the question. What could a man brought up in such family learn from his own situation? And to answer this question, I will use a rather unusual example.
Dear viewer, surely at least once in your life you have seen a full-blown lotus flower. Well, the lotus flower grows in shallow water reservoirs, such as ponds. And as we know, these types of reservoirs are often polluted, which makes the water full of all sorts of toxins and bad bacteria. However, this flower, nevertheless, in good sunlight, blooms completely untouched, uncontaminated by its environment in which it grew. What's more, lotus flower in Asian countries is considered a symbol of beauty, purity, and harmony, and that's why it has become part of their culture.
And so it happens with growing up in pathological family. Just because someone grew up in a family where they didn't experience love, but, for example, suffering, doesn't mean that they have to follow the same patterns and beliefs or behaviors. A child who is born into such family appears in it to light the way for those who have lost it, for those who live in a complete darkness, ignorance. And although it's really difficult to be indifferent to seeing a suffering man, after all, let's remember that from the moment of our birth, none of us is aware of the truth of life. Therefore, it's true that everyone perceives their experiences in a different way, and some perhaps as undeserved punishment. Where in fact, it's true that each of us experiences some kinds of hardship and suffering. Each of us goes through various kinds of tests and trials. We all have to face bigger or smaller challenges. But that doesn't mean that someone is punishing us for no reason. Therefore, please know that our difficult experiences are actually our development opportunities. Dear viewer, if you don't know it yet, know that the soul is strong enough to survive every storm. The only thing that may stand in our way is actually our mind. The mind that simply needs to expand its consciousness, but also believe in its own abilities and allow itself to look at its own situation from a different perspective. Because the purpose of our life is to experience and learn from these experiences. Therefore, regardless of our past, it's really entirely up to us what decisions we make in life and what will our future life look like built on the basis of the decisions we have previously made. Therefore, know that this relationship with the family, unfortunately, will not always be a manifestation of love and mutual respect. So if, for example, someone in the family doesn't agree with your different views or beliefs, instead of trying to convince everyone to yourself, focus on cultivating what's important and right for you. Because the family is there to help us grow, regardless of whether they support our choices or are completely against them. And actually, believe me, but contrary to appearances, everything that's our opposite, in fact, is our greater teacher, because in a way, it completes us. So don't worry if you don't have the best relationship with your family. Perhaps in your case, closer than family will be your friend or future partner.
Another relationship we establish in life is fellow acquaintance. And here in the first place, it will certainly be children from the estate and the surrounding area. However, at a slightly later stage, it will also be peers from school.
And this is where it actually gets interesting, because we finally have the opportunity to translate theory into practice. And so when it comes to the first interaction with a newly met person, it suddenly turns out that we are significantly different from each other, not only in appearance, but also in behavior. It turns out that perhaps we don't have even the same views, beliefs, or even traditions.
Some children are calmer and some cannot sit still. Some are polite and others lack manners. Some children come from wealthier families, while others from poorer ones. And so in this way, on the basis of information taken from home, we make selection, sticking different labels to each one individually. And this in turn creates divisions within the group, and the consequence of this is the formation of several different groups.
And here comes the question. What guides the child and what the teenager in choosing their company? Maybe let's start with the fact that in early youth we make such selection completely unconsciously. Therefore, the child's attention is drawn above all to everything what's interesting, because the child doesn't yet pay attention to any greater values or top-down imposed rules of conduct. The child only wants to satisfy his primary needs, and that's it. Whereas for a teenager, the most important thing is that the person resonates with their state of mind. Therefore, at this stage, we are more susceptible to the influence of others. And this also means that in order to get someone's attention, we will now imitate their behavior. And that's certainly because in our teenage years, we don't get as much attention from our parents as we did when we were a child.
And this unconsciously awakens all sorts of beliefs in us. For example, we begin to think that our parents don't love us anymore. So we feel rejected, unwanted, and that's why we look for that attention elsewhere.
However, we should also remember that this is the period when, for the first time, we have a chance to get to know the world from various different perspectives. Therefore, in fact, it's still a period of trying, searching, and experimenting. Except that now parents don't have as much control over their children as they did before or used to have. So, my dear viewer, the truth is that even if we wanted to, we can't always keep our child from trying something that could passively harm them. Unfortunately, but curiosity usually wins.
And this is certainly why we also call the teenage period the period of rebellion. Because when a teenager notices that other friends are allowed much more, when they notice that they have a much looser relationship with their parents, while theirs perhaps is very strict and cold, what happens then?
Of course, they begin to ignore all the rules of conduct learned from their parents. Why? Because they just learned that life isn't quite the way their parents told them. So when they compare themselves with their peers, they see that some may have, in their opinion of course, much better than them. So they want it too.
And since we experience various new sensations, then certainly also new feelings. And so some of our acquaintances now turn from fellow ones into friendship, which is a much closer bond, because a friend is someone whom we trust.
And that's why this type of relationship, in many cases, turns out to be more important than the one we have with our family, if only because we choose our friends in terms of our interests and mutual understanding. While in the family home, as I mentioned earlier, perhaps we don't receive this understanding, which makes us feel alienated.
Therefore, friendship helps us survive in these difficult moments. But not only that, because taking into account common interests, together we can also experience some new feelings and sensations.
So, to briefly summarize,
with our friend, we can share our concerns. We can support each other in some everyday struggles, but also experience these exciting and unforgettable moments.
Therefore, this type of relationship plays an undeniably powerful role, especially during teenage years. And that's why friends often replace parents who may not fully understand what's currently happening with us. And why don't they understand? Because as we mature, our view or our views of the world changes. So, for example, what today may seem trivial to a parent can mean a huge crisis for a teenager. Therefore, let's remember to be more understanding for our growing children this next time, and let's not demand too much from them. After all, they're still getting to know the world around them.
Another type of relationship is the so-called romantic relationship. After all, we also interact with representatives of the opposite sex on a daily basis. And this, of course, awakens in us interest and willingness to experience new feelings and sensations.
And this is how we expand our life project. And although subconsciously we know that our project has to end somewhere, nevertheless, at this stage of our life, we don't yet have a concrete outline of it. because as we said earlier, we're still gathering information. And so unconsciously, we keep trying, experimenting and searching for something that will help us close our project. So, in other words, we experience our life in different ways, so then we can eventually determine what interests us, in which direction we want to go, or what brings us joy and what gives us sadness, for example, and so on and so forth.
So, generally speaking, we learn about ourselves and the world around us, because only in this way we will be able to close our project and give meaning to it in the future. However, until that happens, of course, we remain only in the realm of illusions. And so we imagine different scenarios. For example, we make up some love stories about a person we like, claiming that only that person can complete our missing pieces. And therefore, we are eagerly looking for our dream partner.
Unfortunately, what we are not aware of is that, guided only by appearance, we attract people who are actually attractive, but nothing more. Therefore, our relationships, until, say, maturity, and sometimes even old age, sometimes never, are rather shallow and end quickly.
So, in reality, the so-called romantic love or relationship is just a beautiful figment of our yet unbridled imagination.
And I say this because
if someone lives in the belief that only through another person can they achieve happiness and fulfillment, it means that this person is still not aware of themselves and their potential. Because the only truth is that only you can close your life project, and you will do it by achieving inner harmony.
in other words, you have to find happiness and fulfillment within yourself. And other people can only help you with this. Dear viewer, in a summary of this recording, I will ask you to imagine an architectural plan. So, as we know, every plan has its beginning and its end, because only in this way we can determine what it actually is. So, in other words, make sense of it. And such an architectural plan is precisely our life. From the moment we leave the mother's womb, step by step, we gather information about our reality. Because thanks to this information, we can build the foundations of our architectural plan. However, once we have built these foundations, to expand our project, we will have to use our imagination. Imagination, which, as we know, will help us illustrate the vision of our project, so that in the future we can connect all the dots together and create one coherent whole. But to be able to specify exactly how we want our project to look like in the end, first, we will have to test, try and experiment with several or even dozens of different ways of living, so that we can collect as much information as we can. And this information will help us ultimately make those right choices and decisions.
And now, translating it into our lives, we can say that through various kinds of experiences, we gain new information that becomes the source of our knowledge about ourselves and the world around us. In turn, thanks to our imagination, we can both recall familiar images and create some new ones. And this means that we can create our own visions, which, with the help of our faith in their realization, can manifest in physical form.
Nevertheless, both in childhood and in teenage years, considering the fact that we're still at the stage of learning everything that we manifest into our lives, is the result of our yet unconscious use of the ability to imagine. Therefore, this period in a way resembles chaos and an emotional swing, because on the one hand, trying something new, we feel excited. However, on the other, when we unconsciously use our imagination, we often get into trouble, and then we suffer.
And so on until we become aware of ourselves. Therefore, it's extremely important that children receive proper self-knowledge education from an early age, because our self-awareness would certainly help us prevent these undesirable experiences that often occur during adolescence.
And here I would like to emphasize that the form of this sort of education shouldn't result from forcing attention on the child, but rather encouraging them to actively participate in the entire cognitive process. It should also be taught in both theoretical and practical form, because everyone assimilates knowledge in a completely different way, and I say this from my experience. On the other hand, when it comes to building relationships with other people, during teenage years, building such relationships is an extremely important element of our development, especially in this period. Because through another person, we have a chance not only to look at the world or life from a different perspective, but above all to learn something about ourselves.
And now, dear viewer, this perhaps will be something new for you, so please listen carefully. Have you already realized that every person who appears on our life path is a mirror image of something that we are supposed to discover and understand within ourselves? If not yet, it's because the ability to see parts of yourself in other people requires self-awareness. Because the skillful use of this skill is a truly powerful achievement that testifies to men's perception of all creation as one. So let me give you a few examples. For example, some people come along to show us our bad habits that perhaps we need to work on. The others, in turn, come to show us the good ones that we should cultivate in ourselves. Some appear to remind us of who we were in the past so that we can clearly see our own progress, while others show us what we could possibly become in the future. Some people come along to show us the way when the need arises, but there are also those who will try to pull us off this path.
And although there are opposites, no matter how positive or negative our experiences with them are, both cases are equally important for our development. Therefore, regardless of our experience or experiences, we should strive to achieve peaceful relationships with other people.
So, my dear viewer, we definitely need other people in our lives, because only in this way we can find out who or what we are, where we are going, or how we would like our life to look like in the future, and much, much more.
In the upcoming episode, we will discuss the period of adulthood and old age. And this time, you will learn what is the importance of the relationship with another person and what types of relationships we build at this stage of our life. But you will also find out what is the true meaning of old age and what you need to do so that you can finally close your life project and give it meaning. But of course, not only that, because you will also learn how to now already consciously use your imagination so that you can manifest the physical form of your biggest plans and dreams. Therefore, I cordially invite you to watch the next episode. And meanwhile, I squeeze you tightly and take care. See you next time. Hey.